I'll never forget that Sunday night in Westerville. The air smelled like roast chicken and rosemary comfort food, the kind that usually keeps peace at the table. But that night, peace didn't last more than 5 minutes. My son, Tyler, sat across from me, scrolling on his phone between bites. My daughter Grace was to my right, doing her best to keep small talk alive. Taxes, gas prices, spring rain, anything to fill the silence that always hangs when family tension builds up. Then it happened. Tyler dropped his fork with a metallic clang that made Grace flinch. He looked straight at me, eyes sharp, jaw tight. "You know what, Dad? You're a loser," he said loudly. Almost proudly. "Mom's new husband isn't. Victor knows how to win." The words sliced through me cleaner than any blade. For a second, I thought I misheard. But Grace's face said otherwise. She froze, her mouth open in disbelief. "Tyler," she whispered. "What's wrong with you?" He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Nothing's wrong. I'm just saying the truth. Look around, Grace. Dad's still driving that rusty F-150. Still working construction jobs at 62. Still living in the same house since Mom left. Meanwhile, Victor's running his own company, flying to conferences, investing in real estate. That's success." I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My hands were trembling under the table, hidden by the napkin on my lap. The picture of us on the wall, a family barbecue 10 years ago, hung slightly crooked. It had been like that for months. I suddenly noticed it. Grace leaned forward, voice shaking. "Dad built everything we have. Don't you dare disrespect him like that." Tyler scoffed, snatching his phone again. "Oh, please. Don't make him a hero. He's been holding me back for years. Victor actually helps me. He's giving me business advice. Real advice. Dad just nags about budgets and being responsible." That last word, responsible, felt like a cruel joke coming from him. I kept breathing, slow and shallow. I wanted to say something, anything. But every version sounded like begging. And I'd begged enough in my life for love, for loyalty, for basic respect. I took a sip of water to steady my hands. My voice finally came out, low but firm. "Tyler, this conversation ends now." He laughed sharp, mean, like he was performing for an invisible audience. "You can't handle the truth, huh? Victor told me you'd react like this. You always play the victim." The word victim hit me harder than the insult itself. It was gaslighting, pure and simple, the same pattern his mother used before she left. Twist the story until I'm the weak one, until generosity becomes a flaw. Grace stood up, pushing her chair back. "You're out of line." Tyler ignored her and turned to me again. "You know what, Dad? When Victor updates his will, I bet he'll actually include me. You'll die with that old truck and a pension check." That was the moment, the red line, the final straw. My own son talking about another man's will as if my death was a transaction, as if his loyalty could be bought like a used car. I stood up slowly, forcing calm into my voice. "Dinner's over." He rolled his eyes, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frame on the wall. Grace followed him outside, calling after him, but I stayed frozen at the table. The silence that followed was heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. I looked at the half-eaten food, the spilled gravy, the empty chair where my son had sat. My stomach turned. On the table lay my phone, screen lit with a new text from Tyler. "Tyler, Victor says I don't owe you anything. He's right. Stop guilt-tripping me." I stared at those words until they blurred. Then I typed back one line, simple and clean. "Me. You'll understand what owing means soon enough." I hit send and locked the phone. For years, I thought love meant always helping, always forgiving, always paying the bills no one thanked me for. But that night, standing in the echo of his insult, I finally saw it for what it was. I wasn't a father anymore. I'd become an enabler, and it was time to stop. That night, after the door slammed and the house fell quiet, I just sat there. The smell of cold chicken and burnt gravy hung in the air, the kind that clings to you long after the meal's done. My hands were still shaking a little, not from anger, exactly more like disbelief. I'd just been humiliated in my own home, at my own dinner table, by the kid I'd spent decades holding up. Outside, Westerville was still. The rain from earlier had left the streets shining under the streetlights. I stepped onto the back porch with a beer and that old Buckeye keychain in my hand, the one I've carried since Tyler was born. He used to play with it when he was little, jingling it like a toy. Now it was just a reminder of how far we'd drifted. I leaned on the railing, watching my breath fog in the cool Ohio air. And for the first time in a long while, I asked myself something I'd avoided for years. Was I enabling their toxic behavior all this time by being too nice? The answer hit me before I even finished the question. Yeah, I was. Every unpaid bill I covered, every rent check I mailed, just until he got back on his feet. Every time I ignored a disrespectful comment because I didn't want to cause drama that wasn't kindness. That was cowardice wrapped in guilt. Linda, my ex-wife, had called it being the bigger person. But you know what? Sometimes being the bigger person just makes you a bigger target. The rain started again, light at first, tapping the deck like fingers drumming. I took a long sip of beer, the bitterness grounding me. My mind went back to that word Tyler had used, loser. He didn't even realize he'd handed me the key to my freedom with that insult. Because the truth was, I'd built a life where everyone took and no one gave back. Linda took my peace. Victor took my respect. Tyler took my wallet. And I'd let them, every damn time. Because I thought love meant sacrifice. But sacrifice without boundaries isn't noble, it's self-erasure. The Buckeye keychain turned over in my hand, the metal cool and solid. I realized it had always been there, a small anchor to everything I'd worked for. My truck, my house, my business, all in my name. And yet somehow, I'd let them make me feel like a guest in my own life. I glanced through the kitchen window. The table was still messy crumbs, plates, an empty chair that felt like an accusation. For years I'd kept that chair open, hoping my family would fill it with gratitude. But gratitude isn't something you buy with cash or comfort. It's earned by people who want to value you. I went back inside, grabbed a notepad from the counter, and started making a list. Not groceries, not chores, boundaries. No more paying Tyler's mortgage. Reclaim the Honda, titles in my name. Stop auto transfers from my bank account. Review the will. Adjust beneficiaries. Just writing it felt like breathing again after years underwater. It wasn't revenge, it was balance. I thought about Victor, the so-called winner. I'd seen his type on job sites before, guys who built empires out of charm and manipulation. Narcissists who fed on loyalty until there was nothing left but exhaustion. Tyler was caught in his orbit, mistaking arrogance for success. That wasn't my battle to fight anymore. My battle was reclaiming my self-respect. I went upstairs to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the online banking portal. The dashboard glowed back at me, my name on every account, every deed, every title. For the first time in years, I noticed how much mine actually meant something. I hovered over the Scheduled Payments tab. My thumb hesitated, then clicked Cancel. It was such a small action, just one button, but it felt monumental. Like cutting a cord that had been strangling me quietly for decades. Then I drafted an email to my lawyer. Subject line: need to update my will and property status as soon as possible. I didn't send it yet, I just left it open on the screen. A promise to myself. Downstairs, thunder rolled in the distance. The whole house creaked like it was exhaling with me. I walked back to the dining room, looked at that crooked family photo again, and finally straightened it. The faces were younger, happier, untouched by betrayal. Maybe this time, I murmured to myself, I'll build something that lasts. Well, people, 10 miser. I turned off the lights, pocketed the Buckeye keys, and headed upstairs. The rain was steady now, soft but certain. I crawled into bed, the silence heavier than ever, but it wasn't the kind that hurt anymore. It was the kind that comes right before change. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I barely slept, but for the first time in years, my mind felt clear. There was no anger, no confusion, just a quiet sense of purpose. The house smelled like rain-soaked wood and old coffee grounds. I brewed a fresh pot, poured it into a thermos, and grabbed my Buckeye keychain from the counter. The keys jingled differently that morning, heavier somehow, like they knew something had shifted. By 7, I was parked outside Tyler's townhouse. I'd bought that place for him 5 years ago, back when he swore he just needed a few months to get on his feet. I'd even made the down payment myself, then co-signed the mortgage to help him qualify. But all the payments came out of my account. Every single one. I sat there for a minute, watching the blinds on his window twitch. He was awake. When he finally opened the door, he looked rough, messy hair, red eyes, still in last night's clothes. "Dad?" he muttered, confused. "What are you doing here so early?" I held up my hand, palm open. "Keys, Tyler." He blinked. What? The Honda. It's registered in my name. I'm taking it back. Summon troop. He laughed, this hollow sound that used to work on me, half disbelief, half guilt trip. You can't be serious. You gave me that car. I lent it, I corrected him, keeping my voice steady. Big difference. Look at the title. It's under Mark Ellis, not Tyler Ellis. He started to argue, but the words died when I pulled a folded document from my jacket pocket. The vehicle registration, crisp and official, with my name printed clear as day. His tone sharpened. This is petty, Dad. Victor said. I cut him off. Don't bring Victor into this. He's not part of this conversation. You want to drive? Get your own car. You're almost 30, Tyler. He clenched his fists, jaw tightening. This is theft. I met his glare, calm. Keeping something that isn't yours, that's theft. The silence between us stretched. From across the street, Mrs. Donahue, his elderly neighbor, was watering her tulips, pretending not to watch. I could feel her eyes, the whole neighborhood's curiosity. It didn't matter. Finally, Tyler shoved the keys into my hand. Take it, he snapped. You're pathetic. Victor was right about you. That one stung, but I didn't show it. I just nodded, pocketed the keys, and turned away. When I slid into the driver's seat, the leather still smelled like the cleaner I'd bought for him last month. The car started smooth, freshly tuned on my dime. As I drove off, I saw him in the rearview mirror, standing barefoot on the porch, arms crossed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The drive downtown was quiet, just the hum of the engine and the low buzz of my thoughts. I passed the same streets I'd once driven him to school on. Back then, I thought giving him everything would buy me gratitude. Turns out, all it bought was resentment. The first Federal Bank sign came into view. I parked, grabbed a folder of documents from the glove compartment, mortgage papers, payment receipts, every proof of ownership I needed, and walked inside. The teller was young, polite. Good morning, Mr. Ellis. What can I help you with? Ed, clear the dild and remember. I laid the folder on the counter. I need to stop all automatic payments tied to this mortgage. Property's under my name, but the resident arrangement has changed. She nodded and typed quickly. Of course. Just a moment. Her words barely registered. My eyes were on the reflection in the glass partition, the man staring back at me. He looked older, sure, but also lighter. More in control. When she handed me the confirmation slip, she smiled politely. That's all set, sir. Thank you, I said, tucking it into the folder. My voice didn't shake. Outside, the Ohio sun had broken through the clouds. The rain was gone, but the streets still shimmered, clean and new. My phone buzzed as I reached the truck. Tyler calling, again and again. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked at the confirmation slip, the ink still drying, and whispered to myself, paper trails don't lie. For years, I let emotions run my decisions. But now, the law, the paperwork, the truth was finally on my side. I turned the key in the ignition and drove off, the same keychain jangling like a victory bell. By the next day, the calls from Tyler had slowed down, replaced by short, bitter texts that all said the same thing. You'll regret this. I didn't reply. I was done arguing in circles. Instead, I focused on tightening the loose ends, the legal ones. That afternoon, my neighbor Miguel stopped by while I was cleaning out the truck bed. He's the kind of guy who always shows up right when you need someone. We've worked together on and off for years. He runs electrical. I do general contracting. He leaned on the fence, holding a cup of coffee like it was a peace offering. Heard some shouting at your place the other night, he said. Everything all right? I told him the short version. The dinner, the insult, the car. He didn't say much, just nodded slowly. Then he said, You ever meet Sarah Whitaker? She's the attorney who handled my divorce settlement. Doesn't take crap from anyone. You should talk to her before this thing turns into a bigger mess. I hesitated. I've never liked lawyers. They remind me of the guys who show up after a storm, clean shoes, expensive suits, promising they'll take care of it for a price. But something in Miguel's tone told me this one was different. So, I called her. Her voice on the phone was calm, precise, no fluff. Mr. Ellis, she said, why don't you come in tomorrow? Bring any documents you think might be relevant, titles, account statements, correspondence. The more paper, the better. The next morning, I drove to her office downtown. a small brick building sandwiched between a coffee shop and a realty firm. Inside, everything smelled like espresso and printer ink. Sarah looked younger than I expected, mid-30s. Maybe. But her eyes were sharp, the kind that saw straight through excuses. We sat across from each other at a neat oak desk. She opened a legal pad, clicked her pen, and said, "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the years of financial support, the mortgage in my name, the way my ex-wife Linda had let Victor, the man she left me for, worm his way into my kids' lives, how Tyler had turned into a stranger with my last name, how I'd finally drawn a line. When I finished, Sarah leaned back, tapping her pen against her chin. "You've been far too generous," she said matter-of-factly. "And that generosity has made you legally vulnerable." She started organizing the papers I'd brought: vehicle title, mortgage deed, canceled checks like puzzle pieces. "The good news is, everything's in your name. That gives you leverage. But if your ex or her husband start claiming you acted in bad faith or caused financial distress, you'll need documentation showing consistent support, bank transfers, receipts, text messages, anything that proves a pattern." I nodded. "I've got years of records, every payment, every email." She smiled faintly. "Good, paper trails are gold in family disputes, and since your ex's husband owns a company, any public financial irregularities could be relevant too. We might find something useful there." The way she said it, calm, professional, but with a spark of something, made me realize she wasn't just building a case. She was building a strategy. I told her about Victor's threats, how he'd called and implied he'd bury me in court costs. Sarah didn't flinch. "Classic intimidation," she said. "Narcissists love control through fear. The key is to document, not react. We'll get ahead of him." She leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Ellis, you're not just cutting financial ties, you're resetting boundaries. That's the hardest kind of fight, because it threatens people who depend on your silence." That line hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd been quiet, thinking peace was the goal. But silence had only kept me trapped. Before I left, she handed me a checklist clipped to a folder. "Gather everything you can: texts, voicemails, bank statements. I'll draft a formal notice to both your son and his stepfather outlining the property rights. Once they realize you're represented, their tone will change." On the drive home, I rolled down the window and let the cool air hit my face. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it felt like direction. For the first time, someone else saw the truth I'd been living. When I got back, Miguel was out front, tinkering with his motorcycle. "How'd it go?" he asked. "She's good," I said, tossing the folder onto my truck seat. "Really good." He smirked. "Told you. Sometimes the right people show up after the storm." That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, same place where it had all fallen apart days before. But this time, there was a folder full of leverage in front of me, and for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. The first call came 2 nights later. Linda's name flashed on my phone like a warning light. I let it ring out the first time, but she called again and again. On the 4th ring, I picked up. "Mark, what the hell did you do?" she shouted before I could say a word. Her voice had that edge I remembered too well, the tone she used when she thought she still had authority over my life. "Tyler's furious. You took his car, stopped paying his mortgage. He's humiliated." I took a slow breath. "I didn't take anything that wasn't mine, and I'm done funding his life." "Oh, come on," she snapped. "He's your son, Mark. You don't just cut your child off like that." "No," I said evenly. "You don't just raise one to believe the world owes him everything. That's how we got here." "My now. Talk it embracing by the round." There was a pause, the kind of silence where you can almost hear the other person realizing you've changed the rules. Then she went for her favorite weapon: guilt. "Victor says you're being irrational. He's worried about the legal side of this, Mark. You might be opening yourself up to a lawsuit." I actually laughed. "If Victor's worried about legal issues, maybe he should take a look at his own books." She gasped. "Are you threatening him?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm just done being his silent investor." The line went dead. I didn't call back. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. But the universe has a way of testing your boundaries the moment you set them. Later that evening, around 9:30, there was a hard knock at the front door. I opened it to find Tyler standing there, eyes bloodshot, fists clenched. Rain had started again, soaking through his hoodie. "Give me the keys," he said flatly. They're not yours, I replied. You're unbelievable. His voice cracked, half rage, half panic. Victor says you can't just take things back because you feel like it. He's talking to his lawyers. I crossed my arms. Good. Tell him to make sure they read the titles carefully. Stop acting like this, he shouted, stepping forward. You've always tried to control me. This is abuse. I almost laughed, but it came out like a sigh. You've been living off me for years, Tyler. I gave you a roof, a car, and chance after chance. This isn't abuse, it's accountability. His jaw trembled. You're ruining my life. No, I said. I'm letting you build one of your own. He stood there for a few seconds, breathing hard, then turned and stomped down the steps, muttering, Victor was right, you are pathetic. The car waiting at the curb, Victor's, I guessed, peeled away as soon as he got in. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt foreign, like I was standing in the ruins of a war I hadn't realized I'd been fighting for years. My phone buzzed once more. This time, it was an email from Victor himself, subject line, cease and desist. I opened it and laughed under my breath. It was a thinly veiled threat, full of legal jargon meant to sound intimidating. The words emotional distress and financial manipulation popped out like neon signs. I forwarded it to Sarah with a short note. He's showing his cards early. Her reply came 10 minutes later. Perfect. Keep every message. Don't engage. That was the difference between now and before. I wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. I was documenting. Every call, every text, every piece of paper. They were all becoming part of a trail, one that led straight to the truth. Around midnight, I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table again. The rain outside drummed softly against the windows. I glanced at my phone, half expecting another outburst, but it stayed silent, and in that silence, something settled inside me. Not peace, not yet, but certainty. I wasn't losing my family. I was just refusing to keep renting my dignity to them. A few days later, I sat across from Sarah in her office again, watching her sort through a stack of papers like she was laying out a battle plan. The morning light filtered through the blinds, striping the table with shadows. I'd brought everything she asked for: emails, bank records, texts from Tyler, even an old notebook where I'd tracked years of payments. Every line told the same story. Me working, them taking. Sarah adjusted her glasses and smiled slightly. You've done half my job for me, she said, scanning a page. You've got receipts for everything, literally. That's good. We can use this. I wasn't keeping them to fight anyone, I said. I just didn't want to forget how much I'd given. She looked up. That's what most good people say right before they realize it's evidence. Thanks, doin'. She started to outline the next steps. A formal notice of property ownership to Tyler, notifying him that the car and the house he lived in were legally mine. A second advisory letter to Victor, stating that any interference or threats would be handled through counsel. Then she tapped her pen on the folder labeled Kane Ventures LLC. We're also digging into Victor's business filings. If he's been manipulating funds, that's leverage. The word leverage rolled around in my mind like new armor. For years, I'd felt exposed financially, emotionally, but now, the balance was shifting. I showed her the email Victor had sent me earlier that week, the one full of veiled threats and fake legal language. Sarah read it once, then looked at me with a kind of amused disbelief. He really thinks bullying people with money makes him untouchable. She slid the printout into a folder. We'll file this under Exhibit A, narcissistic arrogance. I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. While she worked through the paperwork, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Grace. Grace, Dad, Tyler's been posting about you on Facebook. Says you're trying to ruin him. I'm sorry. I'm trying to talk to him. Don't worry about it. He's lashing out because he's losing control. Sarah glanced up from her notes. You okay? I nodded. Yeah. I've lived through worse. She smiled faintly. You're handling this better than most. Usually, people crumble when it's their own kids turning against them. I thought about that as I drove home later, the line between love and enabling, between father and financier. For years, I'd blurred it until there was nothing left but guilt and exhaustion. But guilt doesn't keep the lights on. And it doesn't teach accountability. That evening, I sat down at my desk with the documents Sarah had given me. Each letter was firm, factual, almost cold, exactly what emotionless justice looks like. No begging, No defending. Just facts. Ownership, payment records, title, legal rights. I printed 3 copies, signed each one, and sealed them in envelopes. One for Tyler, one for Victor, one for my records. The next morning, I drove to the post office. The clerk asked, "Certified mail?" And I said yes because this time, I wanted proof. Not for them. For me. When I got back, Grace called. Her voice was hesitant, gentle. "Dad, I think you should know something." "What's wrong?" "It's about Tyler and Victor. I saw a contract, something about an investment deal between them. It looks bad." My stomach dropped. "How bad?" She hesitated. "It's not an investment, Dad. It's a loan agreement. Tyler signed something that lets Victor claim collateral if he defaults, and the collateral is the house. Your house." For a second, I couldn't even breathe. "He put my property down as collateral?" "Looks like it," she said quietly. "He probably didn't even read it." I closed my eyes. It made perfect sense, Victor offering business advice, dangling fake opportunities while pulling strings behind the scenes. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was sabotage. I emailed the document Grace sent over to Sarah immediately. She called back within minutes. "This changes everything," she said. "If Victor filed that loan under false pretenses, it's fraud. We can void it and build a stronger defense. I'll draft a notice of dispute tonight." Her voice carried the steady tone of someone who'd fought battles like this before. "This is exactly what narcissists do," she added. "They bait you into reacting emotionally so they can spin the story. You didn't take the bait and now he's trapped by his own paper trail." I looked around my kitchen, the same table, the same crooked photo on the wall, and realized I wasn't the one under attack anymore. I was the one building the case. Later that night, Grace texted again. "Grace, Tyler's scared, Dad. He said Victor's threatening to cut him off unless he helps take you to court." "Me? Then maybe he needs to see who's really using him." She replied with a single heart emoji. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward my son, just pity. He was drowning, and he thought Victor was the life raft when in reality, he was the anchor. By midnight, I'd heard back from Sarah again. She'd filed the dispute notice and flagged the suspicious loan. Attached was a short message. "Sarah, rest easy tonight. You just gained the upper hand." I set the phone down, the glow of the screen fading into the dark. Somewhere outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the windows. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was orchestrating, and Victor Kane had no idea what was coming. By the end of that week, things started to shift. The silence from Victor was louder than any threat he'd ever made. No more emails, no more late-night calls. It was like he'd vanished or like he was regrouping. Either way, I knew that kind of quiet meant something was coming. Sarah called me early Friday morning. "You should turn on Channel 9, she said. "Local business report." I switched on the TV just in time to see the anchor's neutral smile fade into seriousness. Kane Ventures, a Westerville-based firm owned by businessman Victor Kane, is reportedly under review for irregularities in its tax filings. There it was, one sentence, 30 words, and his carefully polished image cracked wide open. I didn't even smile. I just sat there with my coffee, watching his empire wobble. I thought of all the dinners where he'd bragged about his network, the cars, the trips, the money he made from smart moves. Turns out, some of those moves weren't so smart when the IRS came knocking. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number," I answered, half expecting it. "Mark." Victor's voice came through, tight and furious. "You think you're clever? You think you can mess with me and walk away? I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done yourself," I said. "Except mine was legal," he scoffed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've got people, lawyers, investors. I could bury you in paperwork for years." "I'm sure you could," I said evenly. "But you'll be too busy dealing with your own audit." He went silent for a beat, then spat out. "You're jealous, that's all. Linda left you because you couldn't keep up. You can take away a car or a house, but you can't take away the fact that she chose better." That word again, better. The same poison Tyler had repeated. I almost laughed. "She didn't choose better, Victor. She chose louder. There's a difference," he swore under his breath, then hung up. I stared at my reflection in the black phone screen for a long time. A few months ago, that kind of confrontation would have gutted me. I would have spent days replaying it, wondering if I'd gone too far. But now, it just rolled off me like rain on steel. That afternoon, Grace came by with lunch. She placed a paper bag on the counter and looked at me carefully. "You've seen the news?" "Yeah. Tyler's freaking out. He said Victor's blaming you for the investigation. He's threatening to cut Tyler off completely." I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. That's what bullies do when they lose power. They look for someone else to kick. Grace sat down across from me, her eyes soft but searching. "Do you ever feel guilty?" "Every day," I admitted. "But guilt's a bad compass. It points you back to the same mistakes." She nodded slowly. "He called me crying last night, Dad. Said he didn't mean what he said at dinner. Said he's scared." I looked out the window, the fall light turning the backyard gold. "He's not scared of losing money, Grace. He's scared of losing control. But that's what he needs to realize. He can't keep living like he's entitled to everything." For a while, we just sat in silence. The kind that doesn't hurt. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, you know. You've done what most people can't: set boundaries with family." That word again, boundaries. I'd heard it from Sarah, from my therapist years ago. Even from a self-help podcast Grace had sent me once that I never listened to. But now I understood it in my bones. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. You decide who gets to walk through and who doesn't. Later that night, I poured a drink and went through some old boxes I hadn't touched in years. Letters from Linda, photos from the kids' birthdays, pay stubs from the early days when I was scraping together everything I could to build a life for them. I found one photo that stopped me cold. Tyler at 16, standing next to the truck I'd rebuilt for him, grease on his hands, a grin that was all pride. Back then, he looked at me like I hung the moon. Before the resentment, before Victor, before money turned love into leverage. I slipped the photo back into the envelope, careful not to fold it. The next morning, Sarah called again. "You'll like this," she said. "Victor's legal team sent a withdrawal notice on that fraudulent loan. They're trying to backpedal before it gets worse." "Good," I said. "Let them run. They're just catching up to the truth." Then she paused. "How are you holding up? Be honest." I hesitated. Strangely calm. Maybe that's what happens when you finally stop begging to be understood. She was quiet for a moment. "That's growth, Mark. That's power. Treeing to wear class." After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the neighborhood. The sky was clear, crisp, unburdened. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the divorce. Not happiness, exactly, but dignity. And as I watched the light spill over the quiet streets, I whispered to myself, guilt isn't love, boundaries are. A few days later, I stopped by Sarah's office again. The storm around Victor was getting louder. Rumors of audits, clients pulling contracts, his name popping up in every local news feed. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was a strange mix of relief and emptiness. When you spend years fighting to be heard, silence doesn't feel peaceful right away, it feels foreign. Sarah was at her desk, sorting through papers, her usual calm composure steady as ever. "Mark," she said with a small smile, "you're right on time." She gestured for me to sit, then handed me a new document. "This is the formal request for financial disclosure. Once Victor receives this, he'll know you're serious. It's a pre-litigation move. He can either cooperate or get buried in depositions." I nodded, reading the bold print on the first page. "You really don't waste words, do you?" She smirked. "Efficiency is my love language." For the first time in a while, I actually laughed. The sound felt awkward, rusty, but real. Then she leaned back, her expression softening. "Can I tell you something, Mark, off the record?" "Sure," I said. "At this point you probably know me better than half my family." She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I took this case because it reminded me of my mother. She spent 20 years married to a man like Victor, charming in public, manipulative in private. He made her question her own sanity, her own worth. Every time she tried to stand up for herself, he called her crazy or ungrateful." I stayed quiet, listening. Her voice didn't shake, but there was something raw underneath it. "She didn't fight back until it was too late," Sarah continued. "By the time she finally left, he'd drained her emotionally and financially. Watching her rebuild, watching her find her power again, it's why I became a lawyer. I can't undo her story, but I can make sure men like Victor don't get to rewrite someone else's." The room felt heavy with truth. For a moment, I saw the steel behind her, calm, not ambition, but purpose. "I didn't know," I said quietly. "But It makes sense. You don't just understand the law, you understand the people stuck inside it. She smiled, but there was a tiredness in it. Empathy can be a double-edged sword. It helps me fight, but it also makes the stories stick, as and to know that binded to a friending. We sat in silence for a few seconds, the hum of her office filling the space. Finally, she exhaled and slid another folder toward me. There's one more step I want to take. A confrontation meeting. Not in court yet. A direct face-to-face session with Victor and his counsel. I want you there. I frowned. You think that's a good idea? I do, she said simply. You've spent your whole life being cornered by bullies. This time, you'll face him on equal ground with evidence, with witnesses, with boundaries. The word boundaries again. It had followed me for months, like a ghost slowly turning into armor. I nodded slowly. All right. Let's do it. Good, she said, her voice firm again. Bring everything: documents, payment logs, any texts or voicemails from Tyler or Victor. We'll put it all on the table. No emotion, just facts. That's how you win against narcissists. They drown in their own reflection when you hold up the mirror. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Focused, composed, ready. Not for revenge, not even for victory. Just for closure. That evening, I sat outside on the porch as the sky turned pink over Westerville. The air was crisp, cool, and honest. I thought about Sarah's mother. About all the people like her who never got their moment to fight back. Maybe this was more than just about me and my son. Maybe this was about ending a cycle that eats through generations, the idea that love means sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. Inside, my phone buzzed. A new text from Sarah. Sarah. Meeting confirmed for next week. Victor's team agreed. Let's bring the truth into daylight. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Me. Thanks, Sarah. For everything. Her response came almost instantly. Sarah. Don't thank me yet. This next part is where we make it count. I pocketed the phone, feeling the evening settle around me like a blanket. The fight wasn't over, but for once, it felt like it was happening on my terms. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't just defending my dignity. I was defending the lesson that saving yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. The day of the meeting arrived gray and cold, the kind of Ohio morning that smells like rain before it happens. I woke early, couldn't eat, couldn't sit still. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. Years of silence and swallowing my pride had built up to this one moment. Sarah met me in the parking lot of the Kane Ventures building, a folder tucked under her arm and coffee in her hand. Remember, she said, you don't need to prove who you are today. The documents do that for you. We walked into the glass lobby together. Victor was already there with his lawyer, sitting like he owned the place, which, for now, he still technically did. Linda sat beside him, avoiding my eyes, and Tyler leaned against the wall in a suit that didn't quite fit, arms crossed like a kid forced to attend detention. Mark, Victor said as we entered, his voice still smooth but fraying around the edges. Glad you could make it. Let's try to be civil, shall we? Sarah spoke before I could. We intend to be. As long as the facts are treated with the same respect. We took our seats around the long oak conference table. The air felt tight, like even the building was waiting to exhale. Sarah began calmly, spreading her papers out in precise order. We're here to resolve ownership and liability issues regarding the Ellis property and associated financial transactions, she said. Mr. Ellis has come prepared with full documentation. Victor's lawyer tried to interrupt, but Sarah slid the first document across the table, the loan agreement Tyler had signed under Victor's direction. You claimed this was an investment, but the fine print clearly identifies it as a personal loan, using property not belonging to the borrower as collateral. That's fraud, Victor smirked. Big accusation for someone who doesn't understand business, Miss Whitaker. His nodded 2% and then was a 0.9. Actually, Sarah said, her tone polite but sharp. I understand it perfectly. It's called unlawful coercion. I reached into my folder and pulled out my own stack mortgage statements, proof of payments, the original title deed. I placed them in front of him, each one landing with a quiet thud. You said I was obsolete, I told him, that I didn't matter. But every house payment, every repair, every insurance bill, it all says my name. I built that roof, Victor. You just tried to rent it out from under me. He shifted, the mask cracking for the first time. Sarah kept going. Additionally, The IRS has confirmed receipt of an anonymous report citing irregular deductions from Kane Ventures tax filings. Several of those involve personal expenses disguised as business costs. We're prepared to hand over our correspondence if necessary. That got him. His lawyer's head snapped toward him, whispering urgently. Victor didn't answer. He just stared at me, jaw clenched. Tyler looked between us, confused, pale. Wait, what? You said everything was fine, he said to Victor. Victor ignored him. I turned toward my son. Tyler, you're old enough to see it now. He's not helping you, he's using you. I may have made mistakes, but I never lied to you. And then that press is in create to decide of good the mind. He looked down, his voice cracking. I didn't know, Dad, I thought. I know, I said quietly. And that's why I'm not angry anymore. But you've got to start standing on your own 2 feet. You can't borrow your way into being respected. Silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint hum of the HVAC and the shuffling of papers as Sarah gathered everything back into her folder. When it was clear Victor had nothing left to say, she stood. That concludes our business. Any further contact will go through my office. I rose too, and for a moment, I looked Victor straight in the eye. He was smaller now, not physically, but in presence. The kind of man who'd spent his life pretending to be the storm until someone finally showed him the sky. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my Buckeye keychain, and placed it on the table. The keys clinked softly. I didn't raise a loser, I said. I raised a man who needs to earn his own future. Then I walked out. Outside, the wind carried that pre-rain chill, the kind that always feels like a reset. Sarah caught up beside me, her folder under her arm, her smile small but victorious. It's done, she said. Not done, I replied. But finally fair. A week after the meeting, the dust finally began to settle. No lawsuits, no threats, no late-night calls. Just quiet, real quiet, the kind that doesn't feel empty. Just earned. The foreclosure notice for Tyler's loan arrived officially. Sarah had already warned me it would. Victor's fraudulent contract had been voided, and Kane Ventures was now under active federal review. In the end, the company that had once been the centerpiece of Victor's arrogance was now a headline for all the wrong reasons. I didn't celebrate. Justice doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it's just paperwork and silence. Tyler showed up at my door a few days later. No suit this time, just jeans and a worn hoodie. He looked older, maybe not in years, but in humility. His eyes were tired, and for once, they didn't hold anger. Hey, he said quietly. Hey, I replied, stepping aside to let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where everything had fallen apart weeks before. He didn't touch the coffee I poured. Instead, he pulled a folded letter from his pocket and placed it in front of me. I wrote this, he said. But I figured saying it mattered more. He took a breath. I messed up, Dad. I let other people tell me who you were, and I believed them because it was easier than looking at myself. You didn't deserve what I said that night. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. He continued, his voice unsteady. When Victor's world started collapsing, he didn't care about me, he just cared about covering his own tracks. That's when I realized, you never asked for anything. You just kept showing up. I looked at him, searching his face for the same boy who used to sit on this very counter eating pancakes while I packed lunches. I saw a flicker of that kid again, buried under years of resentment and bad influence. Tyler, I said finally, you've said what mattered. Now it's on you to live it. I'm not cutting you out, but I'm done carrying you. If you want to rebuild, I'll support you, but from beside you, not in front of you. He nodded, eyes glassy but determined. I got a job, he said. Construction, actually, Miguel's company. He said you taught him everything he knows, so I figured, maybe it's time I learn from that too. That caught me off guard. Good man, Miguel, I said. He doesn't sugarcoat things. That's why I picked him, Tyler said with a small, nervous grin. Guess I needed a little less sugar. We both laughed, quietly. The kind of laugh that patches over small cracks but doesn't pretend the wall never broke. Later that afternoon, Grace stopped by with sandwiches. She walked into the kitchen, saw us talking, and smiled. Well, look at that, she said. You two in the same room without yelling. Miracles do happen. Sans ray to them. Tyler rolled his eyes, but even that felt lighter. Grace leaned down and straightened the family photo on the wall that had gone crooked again. There, she said softly. About time. After they left, I lingered by that picture. The four of us smiling in a backyard long gone. It wasn't nostalgia, I felt it was acceptance. Life had changed, people had changed, and maybe that was the point. You can't rebuild something without letting parts of it fall first. That evening, I sat out on the back porch. The sun dipped low over the neighborhood, the kind of golden light that makes everything look softer. I held the Buckeye keychain in my hand, its metal edges smooth from years of use. It used to remind me of what I'd lost. Now, it reminded me of what I'd reclaimed: dignity, boundaries, peace. The world didn't end when I stopped saying yes. It started. Maybe that's what justice really is: not payback, not victory. Just finally being able to breathe in your own home without waiting for the next blow to land. And as the porch light flickered on, I whispered to the night, I didn't win anything. I just stopped losing myself. Looking back, the whole mess wasn't really about money or property. It was about power, the kind people take from you slowly, through guilt, through obligation, through the stories they convince you to believe about yourself. I used to think being a good father meant saying yes, fixing every mistake, smoothing every rough edge. But that wasn't love. That was fear, wearing love's disguise. The biggest lesson I learned is that no is a complete sentence. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors, and if someone truly respects you, they'll knock, instead of trying to kick them down. I learned that family isn't defined by who shares your blood, but by who respects your boundaries. I learned that silence isn't strength when it protects toxicity, and that sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for people you love is to stop enabling the behavior that keeps them small. These days, I sleep better. I don't flinch when my phone rings. I make my own coffee without dreading what demand might follow. It's not revenge that gives me peace, it's knowing I finally stopped mistaking exhaustion for loyalty. I'm not perfect. I still miss the old version of my family, the one that existed before money and manipulation. But I'm proud of the man I became in the process, the one who finally said, enough. So tell me, AITA, for standing my ground, even when it meant cutting ties with my own son and exposing my ex's husband? Or have you ever had to deal with an entitled family member who made you feel like setting boundaries was betrayal? Share your stories and survival tips in the comments below.